Ambassador Sarah Chun stood at the observation deck of the human transport vessel Defiance, watching the massive Dominion space station grow larger through the reinforced glass. The structure was a testament to galactic power. 3 kilometers of gleaming metal and energy shields that had never been breached by force. Every species in known space had learned to bow before the Zephyrian Empire here. Every species except one. Final approach in 10 minutes, Ambassador, Captain Torres announced over the intercom. His voice carried the weight of responsibility that came with transporting Earth's first diplomatic envoy to the heart of galactic civilization. Sarah adjusted her simple black diplomatic uniform, a stark contrast to the elaborate ceremonial garments worn by other species ambassadors. No jewels, no flowing robes, no exotic materials that screamed wealth and submission. Just practical human engineering and quiet confidence. Ambassador Chun to the bridge, she said, activating her comm unit. The bridge of the Defiance buzzed with controlled tension. Captain Torres, a weathered veteran of humanity's early space exploration, stood beside his tactical officer reviewing final approach vectors. The crew had volunteered for this mission, knowing full well they might not return to Earth. Status report, Captain, Sarah requested as she entered the bridge. All systems green, Ambassador. The Dominion has granted us safe passage to Nexus Station, but they've made it clear that any deviation from the approved flight path will be met with immediate destruction. Torres pulled up a holographic display showing their route through a maze of defensive platforms and patrol ships. Sarah studied the tactical readout. The Zephyrian Empire's military presence was overwhelming. Thousands of vessels of various sizes, defensive platforms that could level planets, and weapon systems that had reduced entire star systems to cosmic dust. Yet here they were, a single human ship carrying one diplomat, heading directly into the heart of it all. Any word from the other species' diplomatic missions? She asked. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, the communications officer, shook her head. Complete silence, Ambassador. Every species currently has ambassadors stationed on Nexus, but none have responded to our standard diplomatic protocols. It's like they're afraid to even acknowledge our presence. This wasn't surprising. For the past century, the Zephyrian Empire had expanded across the galaxy with methodical precision. They offered a simple choice to every species they encountered: join the Empire and enjoy protection and prosperity, or resist and face complete annihilation. The archaeological records were clear. Dozens of civilizations had chosen resistance. None had survived. The Altarians, master engineers who had built cities that touched the clouds, had lasted 3 months. The Corvin Collective, with their genius for biotechnology and living ships, had held out for 2 years. The proud warrior culture of the Carry had fought for nearly a decade before their homeworld burned. Each had fallen, their survivors integrated into the Empire as vassal species, their independence a memory preserved only in historical archives. But Earth had received the Empire's ultimatum 6 months ago and done something unprecedented. They had neither submitted nor prepared for war. Instead, they had sent a single diplomat. Incoming transmission from Nexus Station Control, Rodriguez announced. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a Zephyrian communications officer. The alien's reptilian features were enhanced by cybernetic implants that glowed with soft blue light, marking his rank within the Empire's hierarchy. His vertical pupils fixed on Sarah with undisguised curiosity. Human vessel Defiance, you are cleared for docking at Bay 47. Your diplomatic cargo will be transferred to Station Control immediately upon arrival. Be aware that any attempt to deviate from standard protocols will result in immediate termination. Acknowledged, Nexus Control, Captain Torres replied. Ambassador Chun will comply with all standard diplomatic protocols. The transmission ended, and the bridge fell silent except for the hum of ship systems. Diplomatic cargo, Saddam used. I suppose that's what I am now. You're much more than that, Torres said quietly. You're carrying the hopes of 8 billion people who refuse to kneel. Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of those words. Earth's response to the Empire's ultimatum had shocked the galactic community. No threats of retaliation, No desperate calls for alliance with other species. No frantic military buildup. Just a simple message. Earth requests diplomatic dialogue and sends Ambassador Sarah Chun as our representative. The Zephyrian Empire, perhaps equally shocked by this unprecedented response, had agreed to receive Earth's diplomat. Perhaps they were curious about this new species that seemed to misunderstand the nature of their ultimatum. Perhaps they found humanity's apparent naivety amusing. Ambassador, Lieutenant Commander Martinez called from the sensor station. You should see this. Sarah moved to the sensor display, which showed the space around Nexus Station in incredible detail. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species were docked at various levels of the massive structure. But what caught her attention were the smaller details, the defensive postures of non-Zephyrian ships, the way they clustered together as if seeking safety in numbers, the patterns that suggested careful segregation by species. Look at the docking assignments, Martinez continued, highlighting different sections of the station. Each species has its own designated area. The Corvin ships are here, the Altarian vessels there, the Vicari in this section. Everyone separated, everyone isolated. And where we assigned, Bay 47 is in a completely isolated section. No other species ships within 3 kilometers. We're being quarantined. Sarah studied the display thoughtfully. Or protected, she said finally. Quarantine suggests they're afraid of contamination. Protection suggests they're concerned about our safety. From what? Before Sarah could answer, proximity alarms began sounding. The tactical display lit up with new contacts. A full squadron of Zephyrian heavy cruisers had emerged from hyperspace directly behind them. Nexus Control to Defiance came the transmission. Your escort has arrived. You will maintain current course and speed. Any deviation will be interpreted as hostile action. Captain Torres studied the tactical display with the eye of a veteran warrior. Those aren't escort ships, Ambassador. Those are executioners. Each one of those cruisers carries enough firepower to crack a moon. Then we'd better not give them a reason to use it, Sarah replied calmly. As the Defiance approached its assigned docking bay, Sarah could see other ships through the observation ports. Sleek Altarian vessels with their characteristic crystalline hulls, organic-looking Corvin bioships that seemed to pulse with inner life, angular Vicari warships that even in peace configuration looked deadly. All bore the same modifications: Empire communication arrays, Empire identification beacons, Empire monitoring systems. They're not allies, she realized. They're prisoners who've forgotten they're in a cage. The docking procedure was flawlessly executed by the station's automated systems. Magnetic clamps engaged the Defiance with gentle precision, while atmospheric processors began equalizing pressure between ship and station. Sarah watched through the docking port windows as Zephyrian security personnel took positions around their ship. Final systems check complete, Torres announced. Ambassador, your quarters and personal effects have been prepared according to diplomatic protocol. Remember, we'll maintain position here until you return. And if I don't return? Torres met her eyes with steady resolve. Then we carry your message back to Earth, whatever that message might be. Sarah gathered her simple diplomatic case, containing only basic personal items and Earth's official credentials, and headed for the airlock. As she waited for the atmospheric seals to complete their cycle, she reflected on the path that had brought her here. She wasn't humanity's most experienced diplomat. That honor belonged to people who had spent decades navigating Earth's complex international relationships. She wasn't their most decorated military officer, their most brilliant scientist, or their most charismatic leader. She was, however, something that the galactic community had apparently never seen before. A human who walked into the Empire's heart without fear, submission, or deception. The airlock cycled open, revealing a corridor that could have been built for giants. Everything was scaled larger than human proportions. The ceiling stretched 4 meters above her head. The corridors could accommodate vehicles, and the doorways were wide enough for 3 humans to walk abreast. This was architecture designed to impress and intimidate, to remind visitors of their insignificance in the face of Imperial power. A Zephyrian security detail awaited her, 6 soldiers in full combat armor, their weapons visible but not actively threatening. Their leader, identified by silver rank markings, stepped forward. Ambassador Chun of Earth, he said in accented but clear English. I am Commander Vexus. You will accompany me to your quarters, where you will remain until summoned for audience with the Imperial Council. I understand, Commander. I appreciate the escort. If her calm acceptance surprised him, Vexus didn't show it. He gestured for her to follow, and they began walking through corridors that stretched beyond sight. As they walked, Sarah observed everything. The layout of the station, the distribution of different species, the subtle but unmistakable signs of a military occupation disguised as diplomatic protocol. They passed other diplomatic delegations during their journey. A group of Corvan ambassadors, their flowing robes marking them as high-ranking members of their society, walked with heads bowed and postures that screamed submission. Altarian diplomatic staff moved in tight formations, their crystalline features dimmed with what appeared to be chronic stress. The HFY War chief, identifiable by his traditional battle scars, walked surrounded by his own people, but with shoulders that carried the weight of defeat. None of them made eye contact with Sarah. In fact, they seemed to actively avoid acknowledging her presence. Commander Vexus, she said as they walked, how many species are currently represented on this station? 47 sovereign members of the Empire maintain permanent diplomatic presence, he replied without breaking stride. Sovereign members, she repeated thoughtfully. That's an interesting term. Do these sovereign members have the right to withdraw from the Empire if they choose? Vexus's pace slowed slightly. The Empire provides protection and prosperity to all member species. Withdrawal would leave them vulnerable to external threats. I see. And are there many external threats in this region of space? The Empire's expansion is a response to the chaos that existed before our arrival. Prior to Imperial unification, this sector experienced constant warfare, resource conflicts, and territorial disputes. Member species enjoy peace and stability. Sarah nodded, filing away the information. It was a carefully constructed answer that avoided the real question while providing insight into Imperial propaganda. The Empire positioned itself as savior and protector, making withdrawal seem not just difficult but actively dangerous. They reached her assigned quarters, a suite that was spacious by human standards, but probably cramped by Zephyrian ones. The furnishings were functional but comfortable, a sleeping area, workspace, and small living space with what appeared to be diplomatic communication equipment. You will remain here until summoned, Vexus repeated. Food will be provided according to human dietary requirements. Communication with your ship is permitted, but monitored. Attempts to contact other diplomatic delegations are forbidden. Understood. Commander, may I ask when I might expect to meet with the Imperial Council? The Council will summon you when they are ready. Until then, you will wait. After Vexus and his security detail departed, Sarah explored her quarters more thoroughly. The communication equipment was indeed functional, but she could detect the monitoring systems built into every component. Her conversations with the Defiants would be recorded and analyzed, but that was expected and acceptable. She activated the communications array and established contact with Captain Torres. Ambassador Chun to Defiance. I've arrived safely and am settled in my assigned quarters. Acknowledged, Ambassador. Any initial impressions? The scale is impressive, and security is thorough. I haven't yet met with the Imperial Council, but I've observed representatives from multiple species. Everyone seems very disciplined. Torres would understand the subtext in her carefully chosen words. She was describing a prison where the inmates had learned to behave perfectly. Understood, Ambassador. We'll maintain position and await further contact. Thank you, Captain. Chin out. She closed the communication link and moved to the single window in her quarters. The view showed a section of the station's outer hull and the stars beyond. Beautiful, but clearly chosen to provide no tactical or strategic information about the station's layout or defenses. As she watched, a small maintenance craft moved across her field of view. Its pilot was unmistakably Corvin. She could see the distinctive flowing movements through the transparent cockpit. But the craft itself bore Imperial markings and moved with the precise efficiency of military protocol. Everything here served the Empire, even if it had originally belonged to someone else. Sarah spent the next several hours reviewing everything she knew about the Zephyrian Empire and its member species. Earth's intelligence services had compiled extensive files based on refugee accounts, intercepted communications, and archaeological evidence from conquered worlds. The pattern was always the same: overwhelming military force, followed by political integration, followed by cultural absorption. But there was something else in the reports that had caught Earth's attention. In every case, the final transition from resistance to acceptance had happened not through force, but through a single moment when each species' leadership had chosen to surrender. The Empire was remarkably efficient at creating that moment of choice, that instant when continued resistance seemed not just futile, but actively harmful to their own people. Earth's analysts had theorized that the Empire's true weapon wasn't its military might, though that was formidable, but its ability to make surrender seem reasonable, even beneficial. They offered prosperity, protection, and peace at the cost of only independence and self-determination. A soft chime indicated an incoming message on her communications array. Ambassador Chun, this is Imperial Council Secretary Nexar. You are summoned to appear before the Imperial Council in 1 standard hour. Commander Vexus will escort you to the council chambers. Prepare yourself accordingly. Sarah checked her appearance in the mirror provided in her quarters. The simple black diplomatic uniform looked even more austere in the reflected light of the station's sophisticated illumination systems. No decorations, no symbols of rank or power, just practical human engineering. Perfect. Exactly 1 hour later, Commander Vexus arrived with his security detail. This time, their armor was more ceremonial, polished to mirror brightness, and decorated with the Imperial seal. They were preparing for a formal diplomatic presentation. Ambassador Chun, the Imperial Council is ready to receive you. The journey to the council chambers took them through the heart of Nexus Station. Sarah observed automated defense systems, checkpoint protocols, and the subtle but constant presence of security personnel from multiple species, all wearing Imperial uniforms now, all serving the same master. The council chambers themselves were designed to overwhelm. The ceiling stretched 8 meters high, supported by columns that seemed to be carved from single pieces of exotic stone. The chamber could have held 1,000 people, but only 12 figures sat at the raised council platform, representatives of the Empire's highest authority. At the center sat the Imperial Chancellor, a Zephyrian whose ceremonial robes and cybernetic enhancements marked him as one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. To his left and right sat other Zephyrians and representatives from the Empire's earliest member species, those who had joined willingly and earned positions of limited authority within the Imperial hierarchy. Sarah walked across the vast floor of the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She felt the weight of galactic history in this room, the accumulated power of 47 civilizations that had bent the knee and surrendered their independence. She stopped at the designated position before the council platform and waited. Ambassador Sarah Chun of Earth, the Chancellor said, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics. You stand before the Imperial Council of the Zephyrian Empire, representatives of 47 sovereign species and 6 billion worlds. You have requested diplomatic dialogue regarding your species' response to our standard invitation to join the Empire. Thank you for receiving me, Chancellor. I am honored to address this council. Your species received our invitation 6 months ago. The standard protocol requires a response within 30 days, either formal acceptance of membership or acknowledgement of the consequences of refusal. You have done neither. Explain this delay. Sarah took a moment to study the faces around the council platform. She saw Zephyrians, but also Altarians, Corvins, and others former enemies who now serve the Empire loyally. Each wore the expressions of beings who had found peace in surrender. Earth has carefully considered the Empire's invitation. We find ourselves in a unique position, and we believe a diplomatic solution might benefit everyone involved. A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the council. Ambassador Chun, said one of the Altarian council members, every species believes their situation is unique. The Corvin collective thought their biotechnology made them indispensable. The Vakari believed their warrior traditions would inspire others to join them in resistance. The Nexari thought their economic networks could survive imperial integration. All were mistaken. I understand their reasoning, Sarah replied. But Earth's situation truly is different. Explain, the Chancellor commanded. Sarah took a breath, knowing that her next words would determine not just her fate, but the fate of her entire species. Earth offers something that no other species has been able to provide, a different perspective on what galactic civilization could become. The silence that followed was profound. You offer resistance, said a Corvin council member, her voice carrying the weight of experience. Every species offers resistance initially. It changes nothing. No, Sarah said quietly. We offer partnership. The word hung in the air like a challenge, and Sarah could see the immediate reaction on the council members' faces. Partnership implied equality. Partnership implied negotiation between powers, not submission to authority. Partnership, the Chancellor repeated slowly. You believe your species can negotiate with the Empire as equals? I believe our species can contribute to the Empire in ways that pure submission cannot achieve. But first, you need to understand what makes Earth different. The Chancellor leaned forward slightly. Enlighten us, Ambassador. What makes Earth special enough to warrant special consideration from an empire that spans 6 billion worlds? Sarah met his gaze steadily. We're the first species you've encountered that already knows how to rule a galaxy. The reaction was immediate. Several council members began speaking at once, their voices raised in what sounded like protest or disbelief. The Chancellor raised his hand for silence, but his expression had shifted from mild interest to sharp attention. Explain that statement. Earth has 8 billion humans living on one planet. We have hundreds of nations, thousands of cultures, millions of different communities all sharing the same world. We've spent our entire history learning how to manage diversity on a planetary scale. We understand something about governance that no single species civilization could know. She paused, letting the words settle. Every species you've conquered was homogeneous within their own territory. The Altarians were all Altarians, following Altarian customs under Altarian leadership. Same with the Corvins, the Vakari, and all the others. But Earth has been a galactic civilization in miniature for thousands of years. We've already solved the problems that the Empire is still struggling with. What problems? Asked an Altarian council member. How do you govern people who don't share your values? How do you maintain unity among groups that have fundamentally different approaches to life? How do you build an economy that works for species with different needs, different abilities, different definitions of success? Sarah gestured toward the council platform. Look around this chamber. 47 species, but how many of them have real authority? How many are making decisions rather than just implementing them? The Empire has created peace through dominance, but that's not the same as creating prosperity through cooperation. The silence stretched longer this time. You claim to offer partnership, the Chancellor said finally. What does Earth propose? A demonstration. Give us 1 year to show you what human governance principles it can achieve with existing Empire systems. One sector, one group of planets, one chance to prove that diversity can be a source of strength rather than just a management problem. And if you fail? Sarah's expression didn't change. Then, Earth joins the Empire under the same terms as everyone else. The Chancellor exchanged glances with other council members. Private communications passed between them. Cybernetic implants allowed for silent conversations at the speed of thought. You would risk your entire species on this demonstration. We're not risking our species, Chancellor. We're investing in our future. If we succeed, both Earth and the Empire benefit. If we fail, will have learned something valuable before accepting membership. And you believe the Imperial Council would accept such an arrangement? Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. I believe the Imperial Council is curious enough about humanity to want to see what we're capable of. After all, we're the first species to walk into your heart of power and propose something other than submission or resistance. The council members continued their silent communications for several minutes. Sarah waited patiently, aware that she had just proposed something unprecedented in Imperial history. A trial membership, a test of alternative governance, a chance for the Empire itself to evolve. Ambassador Chun, the Chancellor said finally, the Imperial Council will consider your proposal. You will return to your quarters and await our decision. Thank you, Chancellor. I appreciate the Council's consideration. As Commander Vexus escorted her back through the station's corridors, Sarah reflected on the meeting. She had played her opening move in a game that would determine the fate of civilizations. The Empire had expected submission or defiance, but Earth had offered something different: evolution. The question now was whether galactic civilization was ready to evolve, or whether the weight of imperial tradition would crush this small spark of possibility. Back in her quarters, she opened a communication channel to the Defiance. Ambassador Chun to Captain Torres. Initial meeting complete. Status report, Ambassador. The Council is considering our proposal. I believe they're genuinely intrigued, but institutional momentum is strong. We'll know more soon. Understood. Defiance remains ready for any outcome. Sarah closed the communication and moved to her window. Somewhere beyond those stars lay Earth. 8 billion humans who had chosen to send one diplomat into the heart of galactic power rather than submit or resist. Tomorrow would bring the Council's decision, and with it, the next chapter in the story of humanity's place among the stars. Sarah woke to the gentle chime of her quarters communication system. Through her window, the stars remained unchanged, but she could sense a different energy in the station's ambient sounds, the barely perceptible vibrations that indicated increased activity throughout Nexus Station. Ambassador Chun, this is Secretary Nexar. The Imperial Council has reached a preliminary decision regarding your proposal. You are requested to attend an informal session with select council members before the formal announcement. Informal session. That was either a very good sign or a very bad one. I'll be ready in 30 minutes, Secretary Nexar. Acknowledged. Commander Vexus will escort you. Sarah took time with her preparations, not for vanity, but for psychological effect. Every detail of her appearance would be analyzed by some of the galaxy's most sophisticated political minds. Her simple black diplomatic uniform sent a clear message. Humanity wasn't trying to impress anyone with displays of wealth or exotic materials. They were offering competence and reliability. When Commander Vexus arrived, his security detail was notably smaller. Only 2 guards instead of the previous 6. Another positive sign. Ambassador Chun, you will be meeting with 3 council members in the strategy chamber. This is less formal than the full council session, but equally important. The strategy chamber was smaller than the main council chambers, but far more intimate. Instead of the overwhelming architecture designed to showcase imperial power, this room felt like a place where actual work got done. Star charts covered the walls, and a central holographic display showed real-time data from across the Empire. 3 figures waited for her arrival. Chancellor Vorthak, the Zephyrian leader she had met the day before, along with 2 others she hadn't seen. An Altarian female whose crystalline features glowed with soft internal light, and a Corvan male whose flowing organic robes suggested high status within their society. Ambassador Chun, Chancellor Vorthak said, gesturing to a chair sized appropriately for humans, please join us. Allow me to introduce Council Member Zuradis of the Altarian Hegemony and Council Member Biovrath of the Corvan Collective. Sarah took the offered seat, noting that the configuration put them in a rough circle rather than the hierarchical arrangement of the formal council. This was meant to feel like a conversation between equals. Thank you for meeting with me in this format, she said. I appreciate the opportunity for more detailed discussion. Your proposal has generated considerable debate among the council, Biovrath said, his voice carrying the melodious undertones characteristic of Corvin's speech. Some members view it as unprecedented innovation. Others see it as elaborate resistance disguised as cooperation. Zarathis leaned forward slightly, her crystalline features shifting to reflect different emotional resonances. What concerns me, Ambassador, is the fundamental assumption behind your proposal. You suggest that human governance principles could improve imperial administration. This implies that our current systems are flawed. Sarah had expected this line of questioning. Not flawed, Council Member Zarathis. Limited. The Empire has achieved something remarkable. Peace and stability across thousands of worlds. But that peace is maintained through uniformity, and uniformity isn't the only path to stability. She gestured toward the star charts surrounding them. Look at those systems. Every one represents a different species, a different culture, a different approach to solving the problems of civilization. The Empire has preserved peace by requiring everyone to adopt the same solutions. But what if diversity of approach could actually strengthen the whole? Chancellor Vorthak activated the central holographic display, showing detailed administrative data from across the Empire. Explain what you mean by strengthening the whole, Ambassador. Our current efficiency ratings are excellent. Efficiency isn't the same as effectiveness, Chancellor. Your administrative data shows that resource allocation is optimized, compliance rates are high, and conflict resolution is swift. But what about innovation? What about adaptation to new challenges? What about growth beyond simple expansion? Sarah stood and approached the holographic display, studying the data flows. Every species you've integrated brought unique capabilities with them. Altarian engineering, Corvin biotechnology, the Carey military doctrine. But once they joined the Empire, those innovations stopped. Not because the species became less capable, but because the system doesn't encourage diversity of thought. Diversity of thought leads to disagreement, Biovrath observed. Disagreement leads to conflict. Not necessarily. On Earth, we've learned that managed disagreement leads to better solutions. We call it competition, and it's one of our fundamental organizing principles. Zarathis's crystalline features shifted to a pattern Sarah hadn't seen before. Puzzlement mixed with curiosity. Competition suggests waste, she said. Multiple groups working on the same problems, duplicating effort, creating inefficiency. In the short term, yes. In the long term, it creates resilience and innovation. Let me give you an example. Sarah activated her personal data pad, projecting a simple graph. Earth's economic history includes something called the space race. Two major political entities competed to achieve the same goal, landing humans on our moon. From an efficiency standpoint, it was wasteful. Both groups developed similar technologies independently. Both spent enormous resources on parallel projects. Exactly our point, Chancellor Vorthak said. But the results were extraordinary. The competition drove innovation at a pace that cooperation alone could never have achieved. Technologies developed for the space race improved communications, transportation, manufacturing, and medicine. The waste of parallel development was more than offset by the acceleration of progress. She changed the display to show comparative innovation rates. Now consider your empire's technological development over the past century. How many fundamental breakthroughs have occurred since the integration of the last major species? The silence that followed was telling. Innovation has slowed, Biovrath admitted. But this is natural as civilizations mature. The major problems have been solved. Have they? You've solved the problems that individual species faced in isolation. But you haven't solved the problems that emerge from managing a galactic civilization. Resource distribution across multiple star systems, communication lag over interstellar distances, cultural preservation within political unity. These are new categories of challenges. Sarah returned to her seat, leaning forward to create a sense of intimacy. Earth has spent millennia solving exactly these problems on a planetary scale. We've learned how to maintain unity while preserving diversity, how to encourage innovation through competition while preventing destructive conflict, how to create systems that grow stronger as they become more complex rather than more fragile. Provide a specific example. Chancellor Vorthak requested. Trade systems. On Earth, we developed something called free markets, economic networks where different groups compete to provide goods and services. The competition drives efficiency and innovation, but the shared framework prevents the competition from becoming destructive. She gestured toward the holographic display. Your empire allocates resources through central planning. Very efficient for maintaining stability, but it can adapt quickly to changing conditions or optimize for local variations. A hybrid system, central frameworks with competitive implementation, could provide both stability and adaptability. Zara this exchanged a glance with Biovrath. You're describing a fundamental restructuring of imperial administration. No, I'm describing an evolution of it. The framework remains the same. The empire provides security, coordination, and shared standards. But within that framework, member species compete to provide the best solutions to common challenges. The empire benefits from improved efficiency and innovation, while member species benefit from the opportunity to excel and contribute. And if this competition leads to conflict between member species, Sarah smiled. Then you mediate it the same way you maintain peace now. But instead of preventing all competition, you channel it into productive directions. Instead of 47 identical administrative systems, you get 47 different approaches to the same problems, with the best solutions spreading naturally throughout the empire. Chancellor Vorthak deactivated the holographic display and sat back in his chair. The concept has theoretical merit, but practical implementation would be extraordinarily complex. How do you propose to test such a system? Start small. Select one sector of space with 3 to 5 member species. Implement competitive governance for a limited set of functions, maybe resource allocation and infrastructure development. Set clear parameters for the competition and establish success metrics. Run the test for 1 standard year. What would Earth's role be in this test? We would provide the governance framework and mediation services. Our diplomatic and administrative personnel would work with existing imperial officials to design and implement the competitive systems. If the test succeeds, the model could be gradually expanded. If it fails, you've lost nothing but a year's worth of traditional efficiency in one small sector. Biovrath leaned forward. And what does Earth gain from this arrangement? Experience with galactic-scale governance, integration with imperial systems, and proof that humanity can contribute to the empire as partners rather than subjects. If the test succeeds, we earn our place at the council table as equals. If it fails, we join the empire under standard terms, but with valuable experience that could benefit future integration efforts. The 3 council members engaged in rapid, silent communication through their cybernetic implants. Sarah waited patiently, aware that she was asking them to consider something unprecedented in imperial history. There are significant risks, Zarathis said finally. If member species in the test sector begin to believe that independence is possible, it could spark unrest throughout the empire, which is why the framework remains explicitly imperial, Sarah replied. This isn't independence, it's enhanced membership. The competition occurs within imperial law, under imperial oversight, for imperial benefit. Success is measured by improved service to the empire, not by autonomy from it. You would need to prove this concept on a smaller scale before we could consider sector-wide implementation, Chancellor Vorthak said. Perhaps a single system with 1 established member species and careful monitoring. I would welcome that opportunity. A single system test would provide valuable data for both sides. Biovrath activated a different display, showing detailed information about various star systems within the empire. The Kepler 438 system has 3 inhabited worlds, 1 Altarian industrial center, 1 Corvan agricultural world, and 1 mixed species trading hub, currently administered through standard imperial protocols with acceptable but not exceptional performance ratings. Sarah studied the data. The system seemed almost designed for her purposes. Multiple species, diverse economic functions, and room for improvement within existing frameworks. What specific challenges does the system face? Resource allocation inefficiencies, Zarathis replied. The industrial world requires specific materials that the agricultural world could provide, but current distribution protocols route those materials through 3 intermediate processing centers. Transportation costs reduce profit margins and slow delivery times. On Earth, we would solve that through direct negotiation between the 2 worlds with competitive bidding for transportation services, which could lead to price manipulation and supply disruptions if one world decides to use economic leverage for political purposes. True, which is why you need regulatory frameworks and competition monitoring. The Empire provides oversight to ensure fair dealing, while allowing the worlds to optimize their direct relationships. Chancellor Vorthak studied the system data thoughtfully. Implementation would require careful planning. Imperial administrators would need to work with local officials to establish competitive frameworks while maintaining overall system stability. Exactly. And that's where human expertise becomes valuable. We spent thousands of years developing techniques for exactly this kind of managed competition. The proposal has merit, Biovrath said slowly, but it also has potential for catastrophic failure. If the test system becomes destabilized, if member species begin demanding similar arrangements throughout the Empire, if the competitive frameworks undermine Imperial authority, then you shut down the test and return to standard protocols, Sarah said simply. The risk is limited to 1-star system for 1 year. The potential benefits justify that level of risk. The 3 council members continued their silent communication for several minutes. Sarah used the time to study the detailed system data, already beginning to formulate specific implementation strategies. Ambassador Chen, Chancellor Vorthak said finally, the Council is prepared to authorize a limited trial of your proposal. The Kepler 438 system will serve as a test case, with a duration of 1 standard year. You will work with designated Imperial administrators to design and implement competitive governance frameworks for resource allocation and infrastructure development. Sarah felt a surge of excitement, but kept her expression neutral. I'm honored by the Council's confidence. What parameters will govern the test? Success will be measured by improved efficiency ratings, maintained stability, and enhanced member species satisfaction. Any indication of political instability, economic disruption, or challenge to Imperial authority will result in immediate termination of the test. Understood. Will I be working with local administrators or officials from the station? Both, Zarathis replied. Senior Administrator Corvani will serve as your counterpart. She has extensive experience with multi-species coordination. Local officials will implement the frameworks you develop together. When would implementation begin? Immediately, Biovrath said. The sooner we begin, the sooner we'll know whether human governance concepts have practical value for the Empire. Chancellor Vorthak stood, and the others followed his lead. Ambassador Chun, you have 1 year to prove that humanity offers something valuable to galactic civilization. Use that time wisely. I will, Chancellor. Thank you for this opportunity. As Commander Vexus escorted her back to her quarters, Sarah's mind raced with implementation details. She had won the first round. Earth would get its chance to demonstrate human governance principles on a galactic scale. But the real work was just beginning. Back in her quarters, she immediately opened a communication channel to the Defiance. Ambassador Chun to Captain Torres. Significant developments to report. Standing by, Ambassador. The Council has approved a limited trial of Earth's governance proposal. I'll be working with Imperial administrators to implement competitive frameworks in a single-star system. Duration is 1 standard year, with success measured by efficiency and stability metrics. Congratulations, Ambassador. What support do you need from us? I'll need our best experts on competitive economics, regulatory frameworks, and multicultural administration. Can you establish secure communication with Earth? And request immediate consultation support. Already working on it. Anything else? Yes. Begin preparing detailed reports on everything we've observed here. Station layout, security protocols, administrative procedures, species interactions. If this test succeeds, we'll need to understand Imperial systems thoroughly before proposing broader implementation. Understood. We'll compile comprehensive intelligence reports immediately. After closing the communication, Sarah spent several hours reviewing everything she knew about competitive governance, resource allocation optimization, and cross-species negotiation. Tomorrow, she would meet Senior Administrator Corvani and begin the delicate work of introducing human concepts to Imperial systems. The challenge wasn't just proving that human governance could work on a galactic scale. It was proving that evolution was possible within even the most established systems of power. The Zephyrian Empire had spent centuries building a stable, efficient civilization based on uniformity and central control. Sarah was asking them to consider that diversity and competition might make them stronger, not weaker. As she prepared for sleep, she reflected on the conversations of the day. The council members weren't tyrants or conquerors in the traditional sense. They were administrators who genuinely believed their system was the best possible solution to the challenges of galactic governance. Convincing them to try something different wasn't about defeating their ideology, but about appealing to their desire for improvement. The next morning brought a new challenge. Senior Administrator Corvani. She was Zephyrian, but unlike the military officers Sarah had encountered, Corvani carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades making complex systems work. Her cybernetic enhancements were subtle but sophisticated, marking her as a high-level bureaucrat rather than a ceremonial official. Ambassador Chun, she said as they met in a working conference room, I've reviewed your proposal and the Council's authorization. I must admit, I'm curious to see how human governance concepts translate to Imperial realities. Thank you for working with me, Administrator Corvani. I'm looking forward to learning from your experience with multi-species coordination. They spent the morning reviewing detailed data about the Kepler 438 system. 3 worlds, multiple species, complex economic relationships, and plenty of room for optimization. The current system worked, but it wasn't particularly efficient or innovative. The primary challenge, Corvani explained, is coordination between worlds with different cultural approaches to commerce and resource management. The Altarian industrial world operates on long-term planning cycles with precise scheduling. The Corvan agricultural world adapts to biological cycles that can't be precisely predicted. The trading hub tries to mediate between these different approaches, but often ends up satisfying no one completely. On Earth, we've found that competitive markets can actually accommodate those different approaches better than central planning, Sarah said. Instead of requiring everyone to use the same scheduling systems, you let them compete to provide the best solutions to shared problems. Explain how that would work in practice. Sarah activated the room's holographic display and began sketching out a theoretical framework. Currently, resource allocation goes through fixed channels. The agricultural world ships to designated processing centers, which prepare materials for shipment to the industrial world, which produces goods for shipment to the trading hub. Every step is planned in advance according to Imperial protocols. Correct. This ensures predictability and prevents supply disruptions. But it also creates inefficiencies and prevents optimization. What if instead you open the supply contracts to competitive bidding? The agricultural world could choose which processing centers to work with based on quality, price, and scheduling flexibility. The industrial world could choose suppliers based on their specific needs. The trading hub could facilitate these negotiations while taking a percentage of improved efficiency. Corvani studied the proposed framework carefully. This assumes that competitive pressure would drive better performance than administrative oversight. Not instead of administrative oversight, but in addition to it. The Empire still sets standards for quality, safety, and fair dealing. But within those standards, individual worlds compete to provide the best service. And if the competition becomes destructive, if worlds begin manipulating prices or restricting supply to gain advantage, then imperial oversight intervenes the same way it does now when administrative problems arise. The difference is that most of the time, the competition solves problems automatically instead of requiring direct intervention. They spent the afternoon working through specific implementation details. How would competitive bidding work across interstellar distances? How would different species' legal systems interact within competitive frameworks? How would the Empire maintain strategic oversight while allowing tactical flexibility? Each challenge led to technical solutions that drew from both human experience and Imperial infrastructure. Sarah found herself impressed by the sophistication of existing Imperial systems, while Corvani began to see how competitive elements could enhance rather than replace administrative oversight. The concept has theoretical merit, Corvani admitted as they concluded their planning session. But implementation will require careful coordination with local officials and constant monitoring for unintended consequences. Agreed. When can we begin working with the system administrators? Tomorrow. We'll travel to Kepler 438 and begin implementation immediately. The sooner we start, the sooner we'll know whether this approach can succeed. That evening, Sarah transmitted a detailed progress report to the Defiance and threw them to Earth. The test was approved, the framework was designed, and implementation would begin within days. Earth's experiment in galactic governance was about to become reality. As she prepared for the journey to Kepler 438, Sarah reflected on the magnitude of what she was attempting. 47 species had learned to accept imperial authority as the price of peace and prosperity. She was asking them to consider that they might achieve even greater prosperity through managed competition and controlled diversity. The stakes couldn't be higher. Success would prove that human governance principles could enhance galactic civilization. Failure would confirm that uniformity and central control were the only viable approaches to governing multiple species across interstellar distances. Tomorrow, she would begin finding out which vision of the future was correct. The journey to Kepler 438 took 3 days aboard the Imperial Transport Nexus Unity, a sleek vessel designed for efficient travel between star systems. Sarah spent the time studying detailed profiles of the system's key officials and familiarizing herself with the specific economic and cultural challenges they would face. Senior Administrator Corvani proved to be an excellent traveling companion, professional, knowledgeable, and increasingly intrigued by the possibilities of competitive governance. Their conversations during the journey helped refine the implementation plan and establish the kind of working relationship that would be essential for success. The local administrators are experienced but traditional, Corvani explained as they reviewed personnel files. They've managed this system efficiently for decades using standard imperial protocols. Convincing them to embrace competitive frameworks will require demonstrating clear benefits. What motivates them personally? Sarah asked. Career advancement, system efficiency, member species satisfaction. All three, but system efficiency is paramount. Imperial administrators are evaluated primarily on performance metrics, resource allocation efficiency, compliance rates, stability indicators. If competitive governance improves those metrics, they'll support it. If not, they'll resist implementation and hope the experiment fails, Sarah finished. That's why we need to show quick wins early in the process. The Kepler 438 system appeared on their sensors as a carefully organized arrangement of 3 inhabited worlds orbiting a stable yellow star. Each planet had been developed according to its natural advantages and species preferences. Kepler 438b housed Altarian industrial complexes in crystalline cities that gleamed like jewels. Kepler 438c supported Corvan agricultural communities that worked in harmony with enhanced biological systems. And Kepler 438d served as a multi-species trading hub where different cultures mingled in controlled commercial districts. Their first meeting was with System Administrator Dextera, a veteran Zephyrian official whose career spanned 40 years of Imperial service. Her office in the Systems Administrative Center was a model of Imperial efficiency. Data displays showing real-time system status, communication links to all three worlds, and archives containing decades of administrative precedent. Administrator Corvani, Dextera said as they entered, "I've reviewed the authorization for this experimental program. I must confess, I'm skeptical about introducing competitive elements to what is currently a stable and efficient system." "Your skepticism is understandable," Sarah replied. "Change always involves risk. But stagnation carries risks too. Your current efficiency ratings are acceptable, but they could be exceptional with the right modifications." Dextera activated her primary data display, showing comprehensive system performance metrics. "Acceptable," she said with a hint of professional pride. "Our resource allocation efficiency is 94.7%, compliance rates are 99.2%, and we haven't had a significant supply disruption in 6 years. How do you propose to improve on those numbers?" Sarah studied the displayed data carefully. The numbers were indeed impressive by absolute standards, but they also revealed potential for optimization. "Your transportation costs account for 23% of total resource allocation expenses," she observed. "Most of that comes from routing shipments through intermediary processing centers instead of enabling direct transactions between worlds. The intermediary centers ensure quality control and prevent supply chain manipulation. They also add unnecessary time and expense to routine transactions. What if we maintain the quality control and manipulation prevention while eliminating the unnecessary steps?" She gestured toward the display. "Competitive bidding for transportation services, with Empire oversight to ensure fair dealing. The agricultural world negotiates directly with the industrial world for raw material delivery, but both sides choose their transportation providers through competitive selection. And if the transportation providers collude to fix prices or manipulate delivery schedules, then Imperial enforcement intervenes the same way it would intervene in any contract violation now. But most of the time, competition between transportation providers prevents problems from arising." Corvani activated a secondary display showing theoretical efficiency projections. "Our preliminary calculations suggest that direct negotiation could reduce transportation costs by 15 to 20% while maintaining current quality and reliability standards." Dextera studied the projections with the intensity of someone whose career depended on system performance. "The numbers are intriguing," she admitted, "but implementation would require coordinating with officials on all three worlds, establishing new monitoring systems, and retraining administrative staff. The complexity alone could disrupt current operations, which is why we implement gradually," Sarah said. "Start with one category of transactions, maybe raw material transport between the agricultural and industrial worlds. Run a 3-month test with careful monitoring. If the results are positive, expand to additional categories." They spent the next 2 hours working through specific implementation details. How would competitive bidding work with existing Imperial contracting protocols? How would quality standards be maintained across different species' business practices? How would dispute resolution work when competition led to disagreements? Each challenge required creative solutions that combined human competitive principles with Imperial administrative structures. Sarah found herself impressed by the sophistication of existing systems, while Dextera began to see how competitive elements could enhance rather than replace traditional oversight. "Administrator Corvani," Dextera said as they concluded the meeting, "I'm willing to authorize a limited test of competitive transportation bidding. But I want detailed monitoring of every transaction and immediate termination authority if problems arise." "Agreed," Corvani replied. "We'll establish comprehensive monitoring systems and maintain daily performance reviews." Their next stop was Kepler 438c, the agricultural world where Corvan communities had spent decades developing sophisticated biological systems for food and materials production. The planet's surface was a careful balance of natural ecosystems and enhanced agricultural zones with flowing organic architecture that seemed to grow rather than being built. Biothes, the world's senior administrator, was a Corvin whose flowing robes and gentle manner concealed sharp intelligence and deep experience with biological systems management. Ambassador Chun, she said as they met in her organic office that literally grew from living tree structures, I understand you wish to introduce competitive elements to our resource allocation systems. This concerns me, as competition can be destructive to biological harmony. I appreciate your concern, Sarah replied. But competition doesn't have to be destructive. In natural ecosystems, competition between species actually strengthens the overall system by driving adaptation and efficiency. Totally. An interesting perspective. But economic competition involves artificial pressures that don't exist in natural systems. True, which is why we need to design competitive frameworks that mirror natural selection rather than fighting it. Instead of forcing all worlds to use the same resource allocation methods, we let different approaches compete to provide the best solutions. Sarah activated a portable display showing Earth's agricultural economics. On Earth, our most productive agricultural regions use competitive markets to optimize resource allocation. Farmers compete to produce the highest quality crops at the best prices, while buyers compete to secure the best products for their needs. The competition drives innovation and efficiency, but within regulatory frameworks that prevent destructive practices. But your Earth farmers are all the same species, with similar biological needs and cultural approaches. Our agricultural systems must account for Corvin biological cycles, Altarian precision requirements, and multi-species trading protocols. Which is exactly why competition could be beneficial, Sarah said. Instead of requiring all three worlds to use the same allocation systems, competitive frameworks would let each world optimize for its own strengths while serving the overall system's needs. She modified the display to show theoretical applications to the Kepler 438 system. Your agricultural world is exceptionally efficient at producing biological materials, but current protocols require you to ship everything to designated processing centers before it can be delivered to end users. Competitive bidding would let you negotiate directly with buyers, choosing delivery methods and processing options that work best for your production cycles. Biothes studied the proposed framework with growing interest. You're suggesting that we could maintain our biological optimization while improving our economic efficiency? Exactly. Competition would reward you for your natural advantages instead of forcing you to conform to standardized processes that ignore your specific capabilities. They spent the afternoon walking through Biothes's agricultural facilities, discussing how competitive principles could enhance rather than disrupt biological systems. Sarah was impressed by the sophistication of Corvin bioengineering, while Biothes began to see how economic competition might actually support rather than conflict with biological optimization. The concept has merit, Biothes said as they concluded their tour, but implementation must respect biological cycles and ecological balance. I won't support anything that treats living systems as mere industrial inputs. Agreed, Sarah said. The competitive framework will include specific provisions for biological optimization and ecological protection. The third world, Kepler 438d, presented different challenges. As a multi-species trading hub, it already incorporated elements of competition in its commercial districts. But that competition was carefully contained within specific zones and subject to extensive imperial oversight. Hub Administrator Nexos was a Vicari whose warrior background had translated into efficient commercial management. His office overlooked the planet's primary trading district, where representatives from dozens of species conducted business under imperial protection. Ambassador Chun, Nexos said without preamble, I've heard about your proposal for competitive resource allocation. My world already uses competitive principles for local commerce. How do you propose to improve on what we've already achieved? Your local competition is impressive, Sarah replied after studying displays showing the trading hub's commercial activity. But it's confined to final sales and limited services. We're proposing to extend competitive principles to system-wide resource allocation and transportation services, which could undermine the stability that makes our current success possible. Traders come here because they know imperial oversight ensures fair dealing and prevents exploitation. If we introduce competition to basic infrastructure, we risk destabilizing the trust that our entire economy depends on. It was a valid concern and one that Sarah had anticipated. Competitive frameworks don't eliminate oversight, they enhance it. Instead of imperial administrators making all allocation decisions centrally, they focus on maintaining the fair dealing and quality standards that competitive selection requires. She activated a display showing Earth's commercial hubs. Our most successful trading centers combine competitive markets with strong regulatory oversight. The competition drives innovation and efficiency, while the regulation prevents the abuses that could undermine trust. Nexos studied the Earth examples with professional interest. Your commercial centers serve single-species populations with shared legal and cultural frameworks. Our hub must accommodate dozens of species with completely different approaches to commerce, law, and social interaction, which is why competitive frameworks could be especially beneficial here. Instead of requiring all species to use the same commercial protocols, competition would reward those who develop the most effective approaches to multi-species commerce. Sarah modified the display to show potential applications. Transportation companies would compete to provide the best multi-species shipping services. Processing centers would compete to handle materials from different worlds most effectively. Your trading hub would become even more valuable as a center for innovation in multi-species commerce. They spent hours working through the complexities of multi-species competitive commerce. How would contracts work when different species had different concepts of legal obligation? How would quality standards apply across different species definitions of acceptable products? How would dispute resolution work when cultural misunderstandings led to commercial disagreements? Each challenge required sophisticated solutions that drew from imperial legal frameworks, Earth's competitive experience, and practical knowledge of interspecies relations. But gradually, a workable framework began to emerge. Administrator Corvani, Nexos said as their planning session concluded, "I'm willing to participate in this experiment, but with extensive monitoring and immediate termination authority. Multi-species commerce is too complex for untested theories." "Agreed," Corvani replied. "We'll establish comprehensive oversight systems and maintain constant evaluation of all competitive elements." The next phase of implementation required coordinating with dozens of local officials, business leaders, and technical specialists across all three worlds. Sarah and Corvani spent 2 weeks establishing the monitoring systems, training protocols, and dispute resolution procedures that would govern the competitive framework. The first test involved transportation bidding for raw material shipments from the agricultural world to the industrial world. Previously, these shipments had been handled through fixed contracts with designated imperial transportation services. Now, qualified transportation companies could bid for individual shipping contracts, with selection based on price, delivery time, and quality standards. The initial results were promising. Transportation costs dropped by 18%, while delivery times improved by 12%. More importantly, the transportation companies began offering enhanced services, real-time tracking, specialized handling for different types of materials, and flexible scheduling that accommodated both Corvin biological cycles and Altarian precision requirements. The numbers are impressive, Administrator Dextera admitted during their first monthly review. But I'm concerned about sustainability. Will these improvements continue, or are we seeing temporary benefits that will fade as the novelty wears off? Competition creates ongoing pressure for improvement, Sarah explained. Transportation companies can't rest on their initial success because other companies are constantly trying to outperform them. The system becomes self-improving. They expanded the test to include processing services and storage facilities. Again, competitive bidding led to improved performance and reduced costs. But more importantly, it began driving innovation. Processing centers started developing new techniques for handling multi-species materials. Storage facilities created specialized systems for different types of products. The entire resource allocation network became more sophisticated and efficient. The 3-month review showed remarkable results. Transportation costs were down 22%, processing efficiency was up 31%, and delivery reliability had improved to 99.7%. Customer satisfaction ratings from all 3 worlds had increased significantly. But the most impressive result was innovation. In 3 months of competitive frameworks, the Kepler 438 system had generated more process improvements than it had in the previous 3 years of traditional administration. The data is compelling, Administrator Corvani admitted as they reviewed the quarterly reports. But we need to understand why these results occurred. Is it purely the competitive pressure, or are there other factors at work? Sarah had been studying the same question. It's not just competition, it's optimization opportunity. Your previous system was designed for stability and reliability, which it achieved very well. But it didn't provide incentives for improvement beyond basic compliance. She activated a display showing innovation patterns. Competitive frameworks create incentives for continuous improvement. Every company knows that their competitors are trying to develop better solutions, so they have to keep innovating or lose business. The result is system-wide optimization that happens automatically. And the oversight requirements. Dexter asked, are we spending more administrative resources on monitoring competitive systems than we saved through improved efficiency? Actually, less. Competitive systems are largely self-regulating. Most problems are solved by market forces before they require administrative intervention. We're spending more time on strategic oversight and less time on routine operational management. The success of the Kepler 438 test generated significant interest throughout the empire. Other system administrators began requesting information about competitive frameworks. Imperial economists started analyzing the results to determine broader applications. But success also generated resistance. Some imperial officials worried that competitive systems would undermine central authority. Some member species feared that competition would disadvantage them relative to more innovative or efficient species. Sarah spent considerable time addressing these concerns in communications with the Imperial Council. Competitive frameworks don't eliminate imperial authority, she explained to her monthly report to Chancellor Vorthack. They enhance it by creating systems that optimize automatically rather than requiring constant administrative intervention. The empire becomes stronger, not weaker, when member systems can improve themselves. The 6-month review showed continued improvement. The innovations developed in Kepler 438 were being studied by administrators throughout the empire. Transportation companies were developing new technologies to compete more effectively. Processing centers were creating increasingly sophisticated systems for multi-species commerce. Most importantly, member species satisfaction was at all-time highs. Instead of feeling constrained by imperial bureaucracy, they felt empowered to excel within imperial frameworks. Ambassador Chun, Administrator Corvani said as they prepared the 6-month report, I must admit that competitive governance has exceeded my expectations. But I'm curious about scalability. Can these principles work in more complex systems with more species and more complicated economic relationships? That's the next question we need to answer, Sarah replied. The success here suggests that competitive frameworks can enhance imperial administration. But you're right that complexity could create new challenges. The Council will want recommendations for broader implementation, Corvani continued. What would you suggest for the next phase of testing? Sarah had been thinking about exactly that question. The Kepler 438 success had proved that competitive governance could work within imperial frameworks. But the real test would come when they try to scale these principles to larger, more complex systems. I think we're ready for a sector-wide test, she said finally. Select a sector with 8 to 10 systems, multiple species, and complex inter-system relationships. Implement competitive frameworks gradually, using our experience here as a guide. That would be a significant escalation from this test. Yes, but it would also provide data about scalability that we can't get from single system tests. If competitive governance can work at sector scale, it could eventually be applied throughout the Empire. As they transmitted their 6-month report to the Imperial Council, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since her arrival at Nexus Station. She had come here as Earth's representative, hoping to avoid either submission or destruction. Now, she was helping design the next evolution of galactic governance. The success at Kepler 438 had proved that human governance principles could enhance imperial administration. But the real question was whether the Empire was ready to embrace evolution on a larger scale. The answer would determine not just Earth's future relationship with galactic civilization, but the future of galactic civilization itself. The Imperial Council's response to the 6-month Kepler 438 report arrived faster than Sarah had expected, and its contents are both encouraging and concerning. Ambassador Chun. Chancellor Vorthack's message began, "The Council has reviewed your preliminary results with considerable interest. The efficiency improvements and innovation increases are impressive, but they have also generated significant debate about broader implementation." Sarah studied the full message in her temporary office on Kepler 438d. The success of the competitive governance test had attracted attention throughout the Empire, not all of it positive. A faction within the Council supports immediate sector-wide expansion of competitive frameworks. However, another faction argues that the success in Kepler 438 may be an anomaly that could lead to system-wide instability if scaled too quickly. The Council has authorized a second test, the Vega Sector, comprising 12 systems with 23 inhabited worlds and 8 different species. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The Vega Sector was significantly more complex than Kepler 438, with established trade relationships, political tensions between member species, and economic dependencies that had developed over decades. Success there would prove that competitive governance could work at galactic scale. Failure could end the experiment permanently. However, the message continued. This expansion comes with additional oversight requirements and more stringent success criteria. You will work with a team of senior Imperial administrators and report directly to the Imperial Council every 30 days. Any indication of political instability, economic disruption, or challenge to Imperial authority will result in immediate termination. The message concluded with technical specifications for the new test and authorization for Sarah to select a team of Earth advisors to assist with implementation. The stakes had just increased dramatically. Sarah immediately contacted Captain Torres aboard the Defiance to request communication with Earth's governance experts. She would need the best minds humanity could provide to navigate the complexities of sector-wide competitive administration. 3 days later, the transport Terra Nova arrived with a carefully selected team of Earth's most experienced specialists in competitive economics, regulatory frameworks, and multicultural administration. Dr. Elena Vasquez, formerly Earth's chief economist for international trade. Professor James Chun, an expert in cross-cultural negotiation and conflict resolution. Dr. Amara Singh, a specialist in competitive regulatory frameworks. And Captain Maria Santos, a logistics coordinator with experience managing complex multi-party operations. Ambassador Dr. Vasquez said as they gathered for their first planning session, "Earth's government have been following your progress with intense interest. The success at Kepler 438 has generated enormous optimism, but also concern about the risks of rapid scaling. What are Earth's specific concerns?" Professor Chen activated a holographic display showing analysis of the Vega Sector's political and economic complexity. The Vega Sector isn't just larger than Kepler 438, it's qualitatively different. You're dealing with established power relationships, economic dependencies that cross multiple systems, and species that have competing historical claims to resources and territories. Dr. Singh highlighted specific problem areas on the display. 3 of the species in the Vega sector were former enemies before Imperial integration. The Nexari and the Vorthak fought a territorial war for 30 years before the Empire imposed peace. The Corvani and the Vicari have competing claims to biological resource rights on 2 border systems. Any competitive framework that disadvantages one species relative to another could reignite these conflicts. Sarah studied the complex web of relationships and dependencies shown on the display. It was far more challenging than the relatively harmonious Kepler 438 system. Captain Santos, she said, from a logistics standpoint, how do we implement competitive frameworks without disrupting existing supply chains and resource allocation systems? Gradually and carefully, Santos replied, activating a timeline showing proposed implementation phases. We start with the least contentious functions, maybe transportation optimization and quality improvement programs. Build trust and demonstrate benefits before moving to more sensitive areas like resource allocation and inter-system trade. How gradually? Sarah asked. The Imperial Council wants to see results, but they're also worried about stability. We need to balance progress against risk. Dr. Vasquez pulled up economic modeling data. Our analysis suggests that competitive frameworks could improve sector-wide efficiency by 15 to 25% within the first year, but only if implementation is coordinated to prevent disruption of existing relationships. The key is creating competitive opportunities that enhance existing cooperation rather than replacing it. Sarah spent the next week working with her team to develop a comprehensive implementation strategy for the Vega sector. Unlike the single-system approach used in Kepler 438, they would need to coordinate competitive frameworks across multiple systems while maintaining the political balance that kept former enemies working together peacefully. Their first major challenge came from an unexpected source, the administrators of the Kepler 438 system. Ambassador Chun, Administrator Dexter's communication began. We've received inquiries from 12 different systems requesting information about competitive governance implementations. Several have asked to send administrative personnel here for training programs. How should we respond? Sarah realized that the success of their test had created a new category of problem. Other systems wanted to implement competitive frameworks, but uncontrolled expansion could lead to exactly the kind of instability that concerned the Imperial Council. Administrator Dexter, please refer all such inquiries to the Imperial Council for coordination. The success of competitive governance depends on careful implementation that accounts for each system's unique characteristics. But the inquiries continued multiplying. Within 2 weeks, over 30 systems had requested information about competitive frameworks. Some were beginning informal implementations based on limited information about the Kepler 438 test. Sarah found herself facing a problem that human governance experts had encountered throughout Earth's history. Successful innovations spread faster than their supporting systems could be developed. Dr. Vasquez, she said during their daily planning session, we need to develop standardized training programs and implementation guidelines. If systems are going to implement competitive frameworks anyway, we need to give them the tools to do it correctly. That's beyond our current authorization, Dr. Singh pointed out. The Imperial Council approved testing in 2 specific locations, not empire-wide dissemination of competitive governance principles. Then, we need to request expanded authorization, Sarah said. The alternative is uncontrolled implementation that could lead to exactly the kind of instability the Council is worried about. She drafted a message to the Imperial Council explaining the situation and requesting authority to develop standardized competitive governance protocols for voluntary implementation by interested systems. The Council's response was swift and decisive. Ambassador Chun, the Council acknowledges the widespread interest in competitive governance frameworks. However, uncontrolled implementation poses unacceptable risks to imperial stability. All informal competitive governance implementations must cease immediately pending completion of the Vega sector test. The message continued with new restrictions on sharing information about competitive frameworks and orders for Imperial administrators to discourage unauthorized implementations. Sarah realized that the Empire's bureaucratic instincts were conflicting with the dynamic nature of competitive innovation. Success was generating demand faster than traditional Imperial processes could manage. "We have a fundamental problem," she told her team. "The Empire's administrative culture is built around controlled, gradual change. But competitive innovation creates rapid, decentralized adaptation. The two approaches are inherently incompatible." Professor Chen studied the political implications. "This could actually work in our favor. If we can demonstrate that competitive frameworks generate innovation faster than traditional Imperial administration, we strengthen the argument for broader implementation. But only if we can manage the implementation process carefully enough to prevent political backlash," Dr. Singh added. The journey to the Vega sector took a week aboard the Imperial Transport Sector Unity, giving Sarah's team time to finalize their implementation strategy and coordinate with the sector's administrative personnel. Sector Administrator Supreme Vexthara was a Zephyrian whose 40-year career included experience with some of the Empire's most challenging administrative problems. Her headquarters on the sector capital world of Vega Prime was a model of Imperial efficiency, coordinating the activities of 12 systems with the precision that had made the Empire successful. "Ambassador Chun," Vexthara said as they met in her primary conference chamber, "I've reviewed your Kepler 438 results and your proposed implementation strategy for this sector. I must say, I'm impressed by the efficiency improvements, but concerned about the complexity of multi-system coordination." "Your concerns are justified," Sarah replied. "Sector-wide implementation is qualitatively different from single-system testing. But that's also why it's necessary. If competitive frameworks can work at sector scale, they could eventually enhance Imperial administration throughout the galaxy." Vexthara activated a comprehensive display showing the Vega sector's economic and political relationships. "This sector has maintained stability for 60 years through carefully balanced resource allocation and political accommodation. The Nexary Vorthac border systems operate under special protocols that prevent resource conflicts. The Corvinthacari biological research agreements require specific legal frameworks. The multi-species industrial complexes depend on precise coordination between different cultural approaches to manufacturing." Sarah studied the complex web of relationships and dependencies, which is exactly why competitive frameworks could be beneficial. Instead of requiring all these different systems to use identical approaches, competition would reward each group for optimizing their natural advantages while serving sector-wide needs. But what if competition exacerbates existing tensions? What if competitive advantages correlate with the historical grievances between species? It was a sophisticated question that went to the heart of competitive governance theory. Competition doesn't create fundamental tensions. It reveals and channels them, Sarah explained. Right now, those historical grievances are managed through administrative control. But administrative control doesn't resolve underlying issues, it just suppresses them. Competitive frameworks could actually reduce tensions by providing constructive outlets for species rivalry. Dr. Vasquez activated economic modeling data. "Our analysis suggests that the most successful competitive implementations occur when former rivals discover that they can achieve better results through competitive cooperation than they could through either conflict or administrative separation." Vexthara spent hours reviewing the technical details of the proposed implementation. Unlike the Kepler 438 test, which had focused on transportation and processing optimization, the Vega sector test would include resource allocation, inter-system trade coordination, and innovation development programs. "The scope is ambitious," she said finally, "but the potential benefits justify the complexity. I'm willing to authorize implementation, but with comprehensive monitoring and immediate termination authority if problems arise." The first phase of Vega sector implementation focused on transportation optimization between systems, the least politically sensitive function, but one with immediate measurable benefits. Within 30 days, inter-system shipping costs had decreased by 14%, while delivery reliability improved to 99.3%. More importantly, the competitive bidding process began generating innovations in multi-species logistics. Transportation companies developed specialized handling protocols for different species goods, created real-time tracking systems that worked across multiple communication standards,